Hello everyone, my name is Exabu and this is Unity of Command 2 Offensive 1941, the Offensive DLC. Yeah, 9 out of the 11 missions of the new Moscow 1941 DLC uncannily have the word offensive in them. And offense in it indeed we shall. This is the first official Soviet-themed campaign for the game, covering a brief but eventful slice between the last couple of months of 1941 and the first months of 1942, which kind of explains the rather short 11-mission duration of the DLC. A bit of a change to the chunguses we've been treated to so far, in the blobby form of the giant Blitzkrieg and humongous Barbarossa. In any case, I'm interested in where the developers of the game go with that, and having played through most of the campaign at the time of this recording, I can comfortably say the DLC will bring you good 15 to 20 hours of slamming good UOC2 gameplay that we kind of expect at this point, with a little twist in that we take over the Soviets at a time most disastrous, meaning that you'll play as the underdog for pretty much the entire DLC, suffering yet unseen losses, and if you hate losing your troops, well, you'll probably need an attitude adjustment. You almost feel like you're in a slasher film, feeding Ushanka-wearing camp counselors to the nasty evil German tank divisions, while the other guys sneak in and take the objectives. The change of pace and mentality compared to Blitzkrieg and Barbarossa is astounding, and it's been a lot of fun trying to learn the ropes again of this hard mode called the Red Army. Even though you do get to see its strength with a profusion of reinforcements and specialist steps, and this little new card introduced in the game called Artillery Preparation, which you can use to invoke the spirit of Zhukov. With it, you can use suppressive fire, and use it again, and again, and again, and some more, not because you really needed it, but it's so much fun! Oh, and then you can attack with the same units. Repeat throughout your front on the same turn. If anything moves on the other side of the front, you lob a shell in there, or better 10. I think this is as close to OP that a Unity of Command card has ever come. And now that we've started with cards, let's proceed to the practical matters of my playthrough of the campaign. As usual, I don't buy any cards during conferences because they are randomized, and try to avoid using cards I get during the missions. All of the footage you'll see in this video is from a classic difficulty level playthrough of the campaign. I'm not yet sure if I'll dare wade into the dark waters of the hard mode with this DLC. And finally, there are a few HQ abilities I highly recommend you to take. Level 3 Enforceable is critical for your HQs, especially Western Front, because otherwise the losses you sustain during the defense of Moscow will drain your HQ's command points and will deny you their abilities. Level 2 in Operations is generally a very good idea. Later in the campaign, you'll face a number of well-entrenched towns held by Germans that you're supposed to take, and set-piece attack has the same chance of removing entrenchment as suppressive fire, but a much lesser chance of creating a city in ruins, which usually is a huge bummer and quite often means that the mission is over for you. As for the rest of the skills, level 2 engineering, just to be able to build bridges, might be a decent idea, but I'd much rather spend that prestige on specialist steps and reinforcements. And now, let's finally look at the missions themselves. I think I've seen this one somewhere before. Offensive at Tikhvin. I came here as the Germans, and yes, now the Soviets have a human commanding them with an all-powerful restart scenario button. And like the German version, this mission is rather easy, and I think you already know the answer on how to deal with it. The entirety of the German salient is supplied from Kirishi, and a push towards it with the forces in the south is an evident and correct course of action. Speaking of that area, even though the Northwestern Front doesn't control too many divisions here, I highly recommend you to equip those units with heavy artillery and then use them for suppressive fire ability to rake in that experience for the HQ. No reason right now, but you'll thank me later. As for the other parts of the mission, use most of the infantry you have in the east to maintain a defensive perimeter around Tikhvin, while all of the mobile troops and guards infantry should head straight towards Kirishi and support the southern push. The Germans will not be very aggressive here, but they will scramble for defense and hopefully protect their supply lines. I've also been able to block the road supply supplying the Germans in Tikhvin and Road of Life before I blocked Kirishi, so just watch what the Germans do and see if you have any window of opportunity to send your infantry and block their supply around Tikhvin. Hold your Leningrad front troops back at first. They're not going to be able to penetrate on their own anyway, so stand back and wait for the German salient to run out of supply. Although crossing the river in that empty hex between Road of Life and Kirishi might not be a terrible idea, as it'll probably distract the AI from your main thrust. Be careful though around that elite German infantry division just north of Kirishi. It's very strong and it will not hesitate to attack units near it. That tank has no shots in hell. In any case, once the Germans run out of supply, you should have plenty of time to deal with the Road of Life and Tikhvin objectives, and dealing with Kirishi will only be a matter of dealing a few cans of suppressive fire. Rostov Offensive is another of the mirrored image missions that remind you of the Barbarossa DLC, and if you have seen that mission, you may have a clue about how to screw with the German advance here. All of these scary tanks and motorized divisions are fed through the Stadeno-Taganrog railway line. If you block it, they're gonna have a bad day. The German Mountaineer division next to that pontoon bridge at Dmitrievka is extremely easy to kick out, and then rush into the breach. This might seem suicidal because obviously the Germans have all these crazy, scary divisions right next to that area, but that's the whole point. The worst thing you can do in this mission is taking a defensive stance because you'll lose. What you're much better off doing is these multiple mosquito bites all over the place, forcing the AI to scatter its forces, lose its supply, and ultimately lose an advantageous position on the east side of the river. Yes, this will involve a lot of losses, but you'll lose troops anyway, so why not do the things that win you battles? Given the push at the pontoon bridge, it's pretty obvious that Dmitrievka will fall pretty quickly. Bolshekrepinskaya might be a bit more of a problem. Try to catch a weaker unit in it, and once you take it, set up a defensive perimeter around the objective as well. Try to get a cavalry unit to attack Taganrog from behind or across the river. Half the time I've found it just to be empty and ripe for the taking. The AI is extremely aggressive here and it'll send everything to try and take Rostov, which, by the way, if they do take, you need to retake by turn 5. Finally, the push in the northwest. I wish I had that much infantry there when I played Rostov as the Germans. So reinforce the infantry defending there, move all the specialist steps from all of the guys in the boonies, and maintain a semi-defensive stance, holding the front line there with your infantry, and pushing forward and picking off weaker units like the Italians with your stronger tanks and cavalry. Defense of Moscow is the only mission in this DLC that doesn't have the word offensive in its name. And for a good reason. This is it, guys. Failure here doesn't mean demotion or court-martial or gulag. Don't make me laugh. If you fail here, you lose the war, and you lose the motherland. Oh, and you have to take a few offensive objectives as well, by the way. And finally, if you look at this map and see nothing but a majestic carpet of units, and you want immediately to get attached to them, you've chosen the wrong mission. You've chosen the wrong DLC. You've chosen the wrong war. In any case, keeping the objectives you already hold isn't that difficult. So let's focus on Narofominsk, Klin, and Mazhaisk. That's the order of increasing difficulty of these objectives. Even though Mazhaisk is just 2 hexes away from your front line, I found it the toughest to take. Mostly because the railway leading from it to Moscow, well, it leads directly to Moscow with that delicious supply hub on the way. So prepare for a defense in that area of the front. The breakthrough should come in the south near Narofominsk. 1, because you'll take Narofominsk. 2, because it's less of a priority for the AI and it's much easier there. And 3, if you take that railway, you'll starve all of the German units south of it. Once you're done with the breakthrough, pivot north towards Mazhaisk, and then it'll be only a matter of kicking that relatively weak infantry units out with your motorized and tank formations. Overall, I've found the German efforts south of the Moskva River however, to be somewhat toothless, which is not something I would say about the north. They have 2 Panzergruppen here, and you better prepare to give them some ground. Try not to lose your more experienced and better equipped units, but otherwise absorb, absorb, and absorb. Your goal here is to blunt these sharp tools and wait for the moment to take Klin back. I have actually been able to outmaneuver the Germans and take that supply hub west of Klin, which feeds all of the units around it. This is probably the easiest way of taking the town, and it might not be a viable option because of the sheer number of German tanks in the area. You might not just have the space to squeeze through, but you have plenty of cavalry and you might just as well try. The other approach, a safer one, is to wait for the Germans to leave someone weaker in Klin, and then take the hex south of the town and use artillery and mass attacks to squeeze the defenders out. Make sure you leave someone decent to actually defend the place with. Left-wing offensive is the easiest mission of the second conference, and though the map is pretty huge, this usually means that the horses have a lot of space to run around in. This is no exception. First on the order of the day is that Guderian guy, pushing his scary tanks into places we don't want them in. Thankfully, this has a very easy solution. The supply hub between Stalinogorsk and Yefremov is takeable on turn 1. I'm not going to reveal exactly how you do it, but there are no special tricks, there are no special abilities, or specialist steps or whatever. You just need to move the troops you have been provided with in the correct order into the correct spaces. Have fun. With that supply hub in your hands and the railway west of Yelets blocked, virtually all of German troops east and south of Tula will start running out of supply. Block the river crossings near Stalinogorsk and Yefremov, and all you'll see is the traditional Soviet army group-sized cavalry charge through the steppes. Panzergruppe 2 is not going to survive that unless you do something really, really wrong. Once all 3 objectives in the east of the map are yours, rush west, all that cavalry, all those tanks will be helpful at Sukunichi. In the north, the Germans keep the tradition of being rather toothless in that area, but they are pretty well entrenched there, so don't really expect breaking through in the direction of Kaluga out there. You are much better off giving heavy artillery to the infantry on the bank of the river at the crossing just east of Kaluga and break through there. This is particularly good because you have so many tanks and cavalry in the area, and you'll be able to push towards Kaluga and probably take it much earlier than the required deadline, especially since the German tanks they're facing are gonna rush to retreat and probably die soon. Once Kaluga is yours, the only big challenge is going to be supplying the entire cavalry horde in the east. Sukunichi itself shouldn't be too difficult of an objective. Despite a smaller size, right-wing offensive is the more difficult of the twin wing offensive missions, not least due to the fact that you'll inherit a lot of badly battered troops remaining from the defense of Moscow, and the positioning of the Panzergruppen is much less amenable to encirclements than on the left. Nevertheless, encircle and deprive of supplies we shall. The first point of interest here is obviously Staritsa. That hex feeds half the German front line here, most importantly the town of Kalinin, and you'd really like those fortified defenders to run out of supply by turn 4. It's actually very easy to break through German lines south of Torzhok, but the Heeresgruppe Mitte HQ is in the same hex, and it'll consume 3 movement points that your infantry will not have to actually take it. Is to force that infantry unit in the plain to retreat to Staritsa. It's very easy, you're most likely not going to destroy it, and then squeeze your infantry through enemy zones of control and attack that retreated infantry again. The trick is, if a retreating unit is in the same hex as an HQ, it'll cause that HQ to retreat as well. In this case, clearing Staritsa for you. If for whatever reason you fail to pull this one off, I recommend leaving an infantry unit next to the river there, and next turn crossing the river and blocking that road between Staritsa and Kalinin. Because if Staritsa is not yours on turn 1, the Germans will probably send a tank divisions there, and you'll be very unlikely to dislodge it. In any case, once Staritsa is yours and the coast around is more or less clear, send a unit to take Volga crossing. It's not guarded. As for Kalinin proper, your first task will be to squeeze out the units right next to it so you can start positioning your troops. Eventually crossing the river south of Kalinin, that German supply hub will be helpful, and eventually taking the town by turn 4. Oh, and the German troops around Torzhok, while they will try to push and attack, if you keep someone in the town and will guard the railway, you'll be fine. Now on to the trickier parts of the mission. First things first, you're not gonna get that supply hub feeding the entire German salient there. I've tried it, it's not gonna happen. So what you're supposed to do here is the next best thing, and it's cutting the Germans off along the line right next to that supply hub. The tank in the forest, though elite, is not super strong, and the German infantry to the south, though elite and equipped with 15cm Nebelwerfers, is out in the open and not fortified. So don't spare your prestige, equip and reinforce all of the troops around those areas, and then let that trap slam shut. I also recommend you not to commit your better troops, like guards, cavalry, and infantry, experienced troops in that first attack, because the Germans will retaliate, and you will lose entire divisions there. But the damage will have been inflicted, the Germans will lose their initiative, and eventually many of them will lose their supply, especially since some of those tank divisions will continue pushing to the east. The choice of your next steps are very situational and depend on what the AI does. You might be able to push into that supply hub and then towards Volokholamsk, but you are more likely to be forced to squeeze southwest and block that railway line just west of the supply hub. And it is when you start approaching Volokholamsk that you should send your best divisions in to mop up the weakened tank divisions in your way and then push towards the last objective. Because Volokholamsk is actually not a town hex, bringing in a lot of artillery is a very good idea. And finally, if you throw these two huge spanners in the Germans' works, Klin will not be exposed to any attacks and there'll just be no need to keep a strong unit there. And this is it for today. Stay tuned as we continue with our increasingly suicidal advances in the second half of the DLC. But now, subscribe. Goodbye.